This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. It is I, your host, Old Gingerface. Thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you for finding the show. Thank you to all the new listeners who are binging the show and hearing what these great men and women of law enforcement actually do on a daily basis, in and out, totally unedited, no holds barred. They let it rip, and you get to hear and see what it is that they have to put up with. And that's the point of the show, just so you hear and get a better appreciation through their stories of what they're actually doing out there. So thank you for the listening. Thank you for the rating and reviewing that's been going on. As always, I appreciate that. If you can't afford to join the Patreon and give monetarily, that's fine. The show will remain free because the whole point is for the maximum amount of people as possible to hear it. But the rating and reviewing is huge. So if you really love the show and you want to give it a 5-star, I appreciate it. I will say a few, we're well over 1,000 now on Apple, but there was one where someone gave like a really great review, but then they click 4 stars, and I think it was an accident. So if that's you, go back and make it 5. I appreciate it. If you do join the Patreon, you will get a 3x3 Things Police See vinyl sticker, which you can put in your water bottle or car or whatever. I've had one in my car for like 2 years now, and it still looks brandy new. So they're pretty good. Pretty good quality, I'd say. I hope you guys are doing well out there. I'm in the Northeast. We're finally getting a taste of winter. It's like 15 degrees out. We've had snow lately. Tonight for supper, my wife made like chicken soup with rice with garlic toast, like the garlic toast I like. You know, it's not like the fancy restaurant garlic toast. It's the just like sliced bread in the toaster oven with garlic powder and like flakes of parsley on it. I just love it. It's the best. It was so good. So it's that time of year where I am. If you're in the Southwest or the West Coast, go F yourself, because you're probably having beautiful weather all the time. With all that said, we have a fantastic guest today. I'm excited to have him on. He's done a lot. He's been all over. He's retired ATF Deputy Assistant Director, former NYPD Homicide Detective, Operation Fast and Furious whistleblower, and author of the soon-to-be-released, in March, it will be released, The Deadly Path. Without further ado, let me bring on the great Peter Forcelli. Peter!
Steve, thanks for having me.
Hey, man, my pleasure, brother. I love the wall behind you. Get all this stuff on there.
Yeah, thanks. My wife actually helped me put it together. She's got a knack for decoration and whatnot. I, not so much. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Looks great. What did you have for supper tonight? Did you have some chicken soup with garlic toast?
I had chicken cutlets and some rice and beans. My wife made it. My wife's Puerto Rican, so she makes Puerto Rican food. That's what we had today. It was very good.
Oh, good for you, man. When I worked at LAPD Backgrounds, I always said I should have been born not Puerto Rican, but I always said I should have been born Mexican, because I was always at the taco truck, man. I love spicy food. It doesn't love me, but I'm fully built for bland meat and potatoes. But I love food like that. It's great.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Hell yeah. One of our officers at where I work is Puerto Rican, and it's very helpful because he's fluent. And we recently had a kid speeding through town, and he tried to pull the whole like no inglés deal, and he just started speaking to him, and he was like, oh. Damn.
Yeah, didn't work out. Nice try, though.
You got me. Damn it. But where I am in Western Mass, it's like there's not a lot of Spanish speakers, and because this officer is with us, they'll put a broadcast throughout the county, and now it's like, is there any Spanish speakers out there? Can you go to this stop? So he gets to go all over the place to go, to translate so that he can, help other cops make arrests and stuff like that.
That's good, but I'm sure it gets old quick.
Yeah, it's like being a female cop. Like, hey, can you come search this female? It's like, oh my gosh, is this my only job now?
Right.
Absolutely. Brother, you've done a ton. You've done a ton, and you started in NYPD, which is, super busy to begin with, and you ended up over the ATF. Did you come through as did you come up through NYPD as like you through their academy and through their whole system before you went to ATF?
Yeah, well, actually, when I started, there were three different police departments in New York City. There was New York City Housing Police, the
Yep.
Transit Police, and the NYPD. We all took the same test. We went through the same academy. I got picked for housing, which actually, to the day I got sworn in, sent to a different room. Thought I was in trouble, and
Yeah.
now that I was going to the Housing Police, I was really disappointed at first. Because took the test to be an NYPD cop. Turned out to be a blessing. What a great job! So I did my first 5 years in patrol. Well, the first three on foot patrolling the projects in the Bronx.
Wow.
This during the late '80s. I started in '87, so it was a pretty violent time.
Yeah.
Then eventually made it into the sector car, and then finally into anti-crime, which was plainclothes patrol. So you were doing patrol duties, but not in uniform. And then I got into the detective bureau in 1994, and then in 1995, Giuliani merged all three departments. So when we heard this was happening, I was a little bit concerned. I didn't know where it'd wind up, but I was fortunate. I wound up staying in the detective bureau in the Bronx. Did a couple years in doing routine detective work, and then did my last 5 years with the NYPD in the Bronx Homicide Task Force, was where I got my first taste of work in federal cases. And the Bronx DA's office was overworked, and plea bargains were kind of the norm. So seeing the federal sentencing guidelines and the impact that we could have with federal cases was that's what lured me to leaving the NYPD and going over to ATF. So I jumped ship in 2001.
So how many years total at NYPD before you went federal?
Just shy of 15.
Okay. So how old were you?
I was 34.
Wow. So you just made the cutoff then. Isn't it 35 for feds?
It's 37, but yeah, pretty much.
Wow. Very close. That must have been a big deal. Like you get real comfortable in the organization you're in, and then you're in your late 30s or mid 30s in your case, and you're just putting yourself out there. You're going to another academy. You're learning the ropes again. Like you're the new guy all over again.
Yeah, it was very humbling, and let me tell you, going through the academy, ATF's academy is no joke. Very physical, a lot of PT, which is fine. I was a weightlifter, which was stupid, because there's a lot of running down.
They want endurance, yeah.
Yeah, and I got pissed off if I had to drive a mile and a half, more or less run one. And I remember one day we did a 10-mile run. I thought I was going to die. I made it. I wasn't at the front of the pack. I'm not going to lie. I was the fat old guy. But it was a challenge. And the weird thing is I didn't actually go through the ATF Academy till I had almost 2 years on with ATF, because I got sworn in with them in June of 2001. And our offices were in the World Trade Center. And back then, if you were prior law enforcement, and I had worked with them a lot, they gave you your badge and gun day one. It was like, just go do whatever you want to do, make cases until we get a chance to send you down to the academy. So then 9/11 happens, and they took this position like, hey, we need you here. We're still doing a lot of stuff. We'll send you when we can send you. So I didn't go down to the ATF Academy till I had nearly 2 years on, which sucked, because if I failed out of the academy, I couldn't go back to the NYPD, because NYPD will take you back in a year. After that 1 year passes, you're shit out of luck. And so that's not being a very good runner. Let me tell you, I learned how to run because feeding my family depended on it. So it was interesting. So I spent my first 6 years with ATF, still working in the Bronx. So it really wasn't much of a transition, because worked the same neighborhoods, kept some of the same informants actually. So it wasn't bad.
Yeah. I know those federal academies are. So is it for the ATF? And because I know I've asked a guest this before, but I don't remember. You go through FLETC and then you go to the specialized ATF Academy. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Back then it was 10 weeks of what's called the Criminal Investigators Training Program, which is pretty basic, frankly, and not that much of a heavy lift. And then after that was 14 weeks of the ATF Academy, which it was a lot more intensive, because now they own you. When you're a FLETC, you could be in a class that's mixed with like folks from OIGs, and there's some really obscure organizations like NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, OIG.
They have cops?
Yeah, NASA has an OIG. So
Really?
you could be going through with folks from those organizations. So the PT isn't quite as intensive in the FLETC program. Then when you get to the agency-specific program, it's a little harder. The Border Patrol program was brutal back then. Ours was pretty tough, and so was the U.S. Marshal Service. We're about on par, and then some of the other ones were tough, but not as challenging, I would say. So we kind of envied those folks.
Yeah.
We'd go into the cafeteria like drenched in sweat. You know how it is. You work out hard, you take a shower, and then you get out of the shower, you're still sweating.
Yeah.
Where some of the other organizations, they look nice. The hair was done perfectly. They weren't sweating. They didn't smell.
So we know we're talking about the FBI guys, right?
Well, they go through their own academy. But yeah.
Oh, that's right.
I heard it's not that physical, and I won't bad mouth the bureau. I do in my book a little bit, but I'll just leave it at that.
Right. Are they kind of, when you're in the federal system, are they kind of they're kind of the largest federal agency, so are they kind of like the one that everybody kind of bucks against, or they're kind of the one that everybody's always kind of like, the FBI? Is that kind of how it works?
It's them, and to some degree DHS. I mean, those are the big 800-pound gorillas in the room. And it's weird, like in certain parts of the country I've worked in, we worked very well with the FBI. In other parts of the country, there was a more strained relationship. And look, everybody thinks that the feds come in and screw over the local cops. We've all heard the stories. I lived some of them when I was a local cop. They do an equal amount of screwing each other over within the federal system. There's plenty of federal system warfare that happens between organizations. A lot of it's organizational pride. But look, some places people work together well, other places not so much.
Yeah. Another sentiment out there is that ATF are like, and I have found the opposite of this because I've had ATF guys on here more than a few times, that the ATF guys are not pro Second Amendment, or they're gun grabber type guys. And I don't see that at all when talking with you guys. I see more like you guys are just you enforce the laws that are out there, but you're very pro Second Amendment.
Yeah, look, most ATF agents that I know are actual, they shoot. Some of them are competitive shooters. Most of them have large collections of guns themselves. They're absolutely pro Second Amendment. They get along very well with the FFLs, which is the licensed dealers. And, the agents, because people think that ATF agents go in and inspect gun shops. They don't. ATF agents investigate criminal violations. There are inspectors that inspect gun shops. Rarely do those things ever turn into a criminal case. I know of personally 2 ATF agents over the years who I've met that I would describe as anti-gun. One of them almost became the director. I'll name him, David Chipman. I mean, he was not a fan of the Second Amendment. I was in the, later in my career, I was on IACP's firearms committee, and David was on the committee with me at the time. He was with Giffords, which I believe he's still with Giffords. And he would get into heated arguments with a lot of the cops that were also on the committee because he just had such an anti-gun position. But he's one of 2 that I would argue took that stance. Look, most ATF agents take the job because we go after folks who use guns in crimes. Everybody thinks that it's all firearms trafficking or felons in possession, and we do those cases. I don't do them anymore. But I mean, I solved more homicides my first year as an ATF agent than I did my last year as a homicide detective, because we worked racketeering cases, we worked continuing criminal enterprise cases, Hobbs Act robbery cases. So I mean, if it involves a gun, that falls into ATF's jurisdiction, and that's what most agents want to work. And then I don't know if you ever heard Jay Dobbins has a book out. He infiltrated the Hells Angels.
Yep.
Ken Croak, who I work with, infiltrated the Pagans. I mean, so they do these long-term, infiltrations to look for people involved in homicides and firearm smuggling, explosive smuggling. So it's not just guns. A lot of folks, and look, especially in politics, they make it about guns.
Right.
But I get it. Look, it's a touchy topic with folks. The Second Amendment is sacred to me and to most agents, but I know some folks think that we don't really care about it. And the other thing is, ATF's made some mistakes over the years, and when they make them, it's usually under the old, what's the saying, go big or go home. They don't usually, when they make it. So
yeah. I hear you. Do you know Lou Valzone at all?
You know what? I don't know him. I've met him a few times. He was based in Savannah. I know he has a book out based on some storefront work that he did.
Yeah.
So I met him when I was in charge of ATF's Miami office, but I never worked with him. I worked with other people in the undercover program, but never directly with Lou.
Okay. Yeah. He was on the podcast. He was great. He's, he looks like he looks like the guy you want to send into the Pagans or something. Big, muscular guy, tattoos, you know what I mean? But yeah. he had some definite, some hairy things. I love the cover of his book. It's got he's got tobacco, he's got alcohol, and he's got a firearm, like kind of on the table in front of them. It's kind of neat. So Peter, can you tell us either or both, the first time as a law enforcement officer that you had a intense call, a call that really got your heart pounding?
Well, I mean, in the projects, a lot of times you'd be walking a foot post alone. So there were times where there's something as simple as you catch a couple guys smoking crack in the stairwell, and you got to take them into custody alone. Some of those things got hairy.
I
mean, the ones that stand out to me, I mean, we're going back now, 30 something years. I remember there was one call where a kid got into a house, in one of the housing project elevators. It was around Christmas time, a little earlier than where we're, talking now. And there was a Christmas tree that some idiot had left in the elevator because, God forbid, you take it downstairs and put it where you're supposed to put it. So the guy just dragged it out of his apartment and left it in the elevator. And some young kid got into the elevator and, decided, hey, this would be a great place to see if I can light this Christmas tree on fire. It was on the 13th floor. So he did. He lit the Christmas tree on fire, and it lit up like a candle. So by the time he made it down to the lobby, he had incinerated himself. I mean, that was one of the first cases that I responded to where I was like, wow, real eye opener. But I actually, not too early in my career, I think it's probably like 3 or 4 years on the job, I got called to another incident. It was the Happy Land Social Club fire. And that was 87 people died. And it was all because some idiot was trying to go in there and pick up the coat check girl, and she wanted nothing to do with him. So he left and went and bought a gallon of gas and got a book of matches from a nearby gas station, went back and lit up the area by the front door. Well, all the other doors were bolted closed because it was an illegal social club. Yeah. 87 people, mostly teenagers, incinerated in there. So that was pretty, freaky thing to respond to. I remember when I showed up, the firemen were talking amongst themselves, and one of the firemen was saying that when they walked in, they literally thought they didn't understand what they were stepping on. But you could basically walk the entire floor without stepping on floor. I mean, it was just dead kids and adults as well, but.
Cindered bodies. Wow, that's kind of like the Great White thing that happened in Rhode Island with they had the pyrotechnics go off and people couldn't get out. And
yes, I think that happened a year or two after, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, you don't forget those things,
Yeah, absolutely. When you got there, was it just fully engulfed? Too late to go in or anything like that?
Oh yeah, there was no going in, and the fire started at the only point of entry, which was the door. That's why nobody got out. And it was weird because I had heard, and I didn't see this myself, that the detectives actually found fingernails in the back door from women literally trying to open the door so ferociously that their fingernails were like embedded in the wood.
Wow, imagine that. That's horrible. Just because this guy couldn't get laid, he goes and burns everybody alive. Damn.
87 people.
Yeah. I had an academy mate that went to the Boston Housing Authority, and same for her. It was like I didn't even really understand what it was. I was in my 20s. I'm like, housing authority? I didn't even have a concept of it. And she saw a lot of stuff. I mean, you're right in the den. I mean, that's where a lot of stuff happens in people's houses and around where they live. That's mostly where everything happens. For crimes and stuff like that. That's nuts. Was a transition? Did you ever leave the housing authority and get into just a normal marked car with a partner or anything like that?
Well, we patrolled the streets too. Our primary focus was in the projects, but our bosses hated if we made arrests off project, they called it. But a lot of times we did because we answered the same radios. So I mean, if a robbery came over at a nearby jewelry store or a liquor store, we got the call just like the precincts. And the NYPD cops would get pissed off too because if we'd get there first, we would take the collar. And it was weird because I probably shouldn't say this. There was a little bit of we absolutely respected each other in different departments, but there was a little bit of a rivalry. And the thing is, if something happened in the projects, the NYPD cops would come in and just beat the hell out of the defendants and then just leave, and we'd be stuck with the mess. But that was the late '80s. It was different era, man. Different job, a different profession, even.
Yeah, that's so funny you say that because I worked on Cape Cod for a while, and we arrested a guy that was a little bit on the road. He was a little bit punchy with us, but when we got in the booking room, he totally calmed down, and he had a pretty big record. But he said Not that, and yeah, it was probably then. It was probably 2010. It was probably 10 years before that. But he said he got arrested in Boston by Boston PD, down by the piers, and he goes, yeah, they beat the piss out of me. And I mean, he didn't get arrested. He said I had an encounter with Boston PD, and he goes, this is why I'm not screwing with you guys any further, because I know if I push it too far, what will happen? He goes, because I screwed with Boston, and they beat the piss out of me, and they just left me there, beat up. Like I couldn't even walk. My legs are so bruised from their batons. And it was funny because I'm like, dude, we're in a booking room with like a bunch of cameras. That's not going to happen here. You know what I mean? But sometimes that's just kind of how it is with a bigger place that's real busy. You might just catch an ass whooping, or back in the day, you might just catch an ass whooping and get left there. You know?
Well, and the weird thing is there was a kind of a weird like relationship between us and the real hardcore bad guys, because they resisted and you used force. And then invariably you'd wind up having to take them before the precinct desk officer. And I can't think of a single time where the person would be brought in handcuffs before the lieutenant would say, "What happened to you, son?" "I fell, sir." Always. Because they knew if we fight the police,
Yeah.
we're going to get hit. They accepted it. There was like kind of weird respect between
Code.
the really bad guys and the cops. That's gone now. I mean, back then policing was a little bit of a full contact sport. Now, you put hands on somebody, even if it's justified, they want to indict you, put you in jail, and all kinds of crazy stuff. The profession has changed. I mean, and it's weird because I spent some time up in Canada with ATF. I was assigned up there as a liaison, and the same stuff that we hear down here. Like if I close my eyes sitting in those squad rooms, I would think I was sitting in an NYPD precinct or a Pittsburgh. I mean, the same complaints that we have down here, they have in Canada, and I've gotten to know some folks from the UK. Same thing, except they don't carry guns. They go figure.
Right.
It's the profession.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's too bad. Cops now, like I'm scared to death of getting in a shooting, because it's like you can literally be charged with murder before they've even done the investigation. Like there's no grace for cops at all. It's like they just straight up charge you with murder like that. Look at the Chauvin thing, where it's like, now everybody's got the 30,000 foot view of it, and legal analysts are going in and they're seeing the real autopsy, and they're going, yeah, this guy was pretty much crucified for the mob. Like he really got he got dealt a sentence that was not appropriate for what happened.
If the cause of death is not murder, how is he incarcerated? Politics of that are appalling. But yeah, the cause of death, from what I read, was not asphyxia. So, and it wasn't ruled a homicide. My understanding is he had a deadly level of fentanyl, and he had some heart disease. I don't get that. And look, when I was in the homicide squad, we investigated police shootings. We never had one that was not justified. I'm not saying that there haven't been in NYPD's time. I'm saying during my tenure there, they were all justified shootings. But we needed a cause of death to charge that case. If we ever had a cause of death come back like that for the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, we would have been dead in the water. So how they got past that to charge him is perplexing. Politics, I guess.
Yeah, I think they let a third party autopsy enter into court that the family paid for, and it said the opposite of the city. It's like, come on, this is this is crazy. Oh well, that's neither here nor there, but just a frustration of the job. Good for you, Peter. You're out of it. You've done your time. You did your thing, and now you're retired. So God bless you. But can you look back in your law enforcement career and tell us about a strange or bizarre thing you dealt with?
Well, I was there for 9/11, which was strange and bizarre. We had a couple things. I remember there was one case that we had when I was still a detective. It's before I left, to go to ATF, where there was a woman who was found in the bathtub. Typical, a bad odor case, right? Mm-hmm. So when we cracked open the door, the woman was in the bathtub, fully skeletonized, with two smaller skeletons. And what had happened is she had decomposed to the point where the skeletons were sitting in the waxy substance, which was whatever, soft tissue and whatnot that had decomposed and turned into this mush. So I remember that was a weird one. It actually turned out, we investigated like it was a homicide because we didn't know, even though we had a forced entry, we weren't sure, did somebody lock the door with a key? It's not like that, the door was left open. And took a few weeks for the toxicology to come back. And it turned out she'd poisoned herself and her kids and committed suicide while sitting in the bathtub. That was a pretty bizarre thing to deal with and see, and the smell, you know how it goes. When
Yeah.
that smell gets on your clothes, it's coming home with you. The next day you get in the car, you almost have to throw up. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
So that was pretty weird. But, look, as a cop, you see a lot of stuff.
Yeah. That is a pretty bizarre one. Peter, can you tell us about your response to 9/11? What that was like?
Yeah, I actually speak still at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. It took me years to be able to even set foot back on that site. I got there shortly after the first plane hit. I remember pulling up to the traffic light, not the light, I'm sorry, to the parking space. I was on the other side of 7 World Trade, and I remember looking up at the building and just seeing the big slash in the side of the building. I remember looking up and seeing like somebody was waving a white, maybe a T-shirt or something white to get attention from people down on the ground. And I remember I didn't respond to the 93 bombing immediately, but I remember, how by the time I got there, they were rescuing people by helicopter that time. So I was figuring, okay, the folks up top will get rescued from helicopter.
Right.
People down below will get out and the building's going to burn. And there's not much they could do to save that building because the fire was pretty intense. And I got out at that time thinking that it was a small plane that hit the Trade Center. I didn't realize it was a large commercial airliner. So I got out of the car, walked south a block, and then made a left and walked east. And that's when I saw a giant plane engine sitting right on the corner, pretty much. I mean, and those things look pretty big on a plane. When it's not on the plane, it looks much bigger.
I bet.
And,
the size of a car.
Yeah, it's tremendous. So I remember, ran into a detective that I knew, John Faust. We went up to the plaza, and while we were up there, we were just doing look, there's no training to get ready for something like that. So you're doing what you can. You fill in the holes. At that point, it was just trying to get people to keep moving so rescue workers could get in. And I remember looking to my left, and there was a young female Latina EMT tending to a guy who was laid out on the ground. He was not in good shape. And the second plane hit, and I turned to look back in the direction where she was, and she literally was at this point also laid out. And I literally watched the color bleed from her face, and her eyes weren't she was gone. So
wow.
So they're continuing to try to just help. I remember turning and looking back at the North Tower, which got hit sooner, and that's when I started to see jumpers. And the worst part about that is not just seeing the jumpers, but hearing the impact of the jumpers hitting the ground is something that it just still in my head. It's hard to get out of there. So left, went back downstairs down to the Main Street level. I actually was tasked with going to find the ATF folks, because what happened was, like when there's a fire drill, you're supposed to go to a muster location so they could do a head count.
Right.
Nobody showed up at that location. So I was sent by my boss to go into the site and see if I could round up some folks to get them to go to where they were supposed to get the head count. And which was a weird choice because I didn't know everybody in the New York Field Division. I had just started a couple months earlier, and we weren't all located in the same office. So it was weird. But I remember going down by the South Tower, and while I was down there, I saw 3 NYPD Emergency Service Unit guys who I knew. John Coughlin was a sergeant when I was a rookie housing cop. Vinny Dans went through the academy with me and went through field training with me. And then there was a guy, Wally Weaver, who was when I was a detective, he was a young cop. He loved watches. We used to talk about watches all the time. Yep. And I was watching them walk south on Church Street, and they started to enter the site right under the South Tower. And Vinny Dans looks at me and he's like, hey, he grabs his shirt, like, what's up with it? Because I had an ATF windbreaker on.
Oh.
And and I left on a Friday and started with ATF on a Monday. There was no
he's like, what's going on?
So he didn't get it. So I was like, I kind of threw my hands up like, hey, whatever, we'll talk about it later. And the dude had a smile on his face. Vinny was one of those guys, little former Marine. He walked in, and as he's walking in, I was actually standing next to 2 ATF agents that I did find, Sal Emilio and Jason Zamoloff. And Jason grabbed my left shoulder, like he grabbed it like with ferocity, and he just said one word. He said, run. So I remember looking up, and from where I was standing, it looked like the tower was falling like a domino. And if you ever see the footage, if you ever see the footage, the top of the South Tower canted, and then the building collapsed under it. So I just started running and wound up hiding under a fire truck for a few seconds just to avoid the debris, and then got out and ran north. But Vinny Dans, John Coughlin, and Walter Weaver died. So I basically watched 3 of my friends walk into the site, never to come out again. And I spent spent the entire day down there trying to, help wasn't much you could do to help. And then spent basically the first night at the site, pretty much, although I had to pick up some radios and drop them off. Dug most of the second day, and I didn't get home till day 3. And it was weird because you wanted to help, but it's either folks got out or they died. Very few people actually needed physical help. So it was a tough thing to deal with. And, losing 3 friends there, watching them go was bad. And it turned out I actually lost 7 friends in total that day. And the
sorry to hear
sad part
that.
is, it is what it is. But since then, it's probably about 21 friends because people are still dying of 9/11 related cancers and other 9/11 related illnesses. I mean, girl I field trained, Jennifer Meehan, she was a lieutenant in the NYPD, died just a couple of years ago of brain cancer. Another guy I work with, I'll stop because I don't want to get everybody all depressed. It's not what this is about. But yeah, another lieutenant I work with just died a couple months ago of pancreatic cancer, all 9/11 related. It's crazy.
Jeez. When you were hiding on the truck, then you had to run. I've seen the videos where like the big, huge dust plume comes up. Did you get out of that, or did you get taken up into that?
Well, that's why I got out from under the truck. What happened was I went under the truck to avoid the debris, and when that cloud came through, it came through with some force behind it. So I got hit in the face with that cloud, and it was very gritty. So I mean, I'm under the truck. I'm
in your eyes,
suffocate. And when you blinked your eyes, exactly, it felt like sandpaper. So I was like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to suffocate. I'm going to die here. What a stupid move. So I got out from under the truck and just ran north until I could duck into a building. But yeah, that cloud, that was some nasty stuff to breathe in.
Wow, that's intense, man. Wow, that's terrible. And then I'm sure in an incident like that too, where it's like you said you were there, like you went home on the 3rd day. It's like no one's probably keeping track of who's been here for how long, or like do you just kind of just tell someone, hey, I've been up for like 2 days. I have to go get some rest.
Well, we actually got summoned to our office in Brooklyn to meet our director. Had flown up in a Black Hawk helicopter and wanted to meet everybody. That's why we left the site. Look, nobody wanted to leave.
I'm sure
our friends were in there. So I mean, there were people sleeping on the streets and then taking a nap here or crashing into apartments because people would offer you their apartment to sleep in, and then you just went back and dug. So I don't, I wasn't the only person that was down there just doing whatever I could do to help. But unfortunately, it's kind of futile efforts because, like I said before, man, the folks that got out, and the folks that were trapped. I mean, I know there were a few rescues, some Port Authority cops, for example, but most of the people perished. They were gone.
Yeah, man. And that whole event is so tragic, and it obviously, but it, like beyond the physical injuries, like I have a good friend of mine who's a guy he grew up with who was a New York firefighter who just died. Actually, my buddy's going to his funeral tonight, or his calling hours, and he just went into the bottle because of 9/11. He was fine seemingly before that, and then since then has just been fall down drunk. He just, because it just screwed him up so bad.
Well, I mean, look, that's a tough thing to see, and I'm not going to lie. Look, maybe it'll help somebody else. I wound up with survivor's guilt in a bad way for a while, and then I had PTSD, and I was one of those folks. Like I thought I was having a heart attack one time. Went to the hospital. Doctors examined me. They could check for blood. I guess there's a marker if you had a heart attack. So I had a doctor. I think it was around 2006 in central New Jersey, the Central State Medical Center, tell me we think that maybe you might have PTSD. I wasn't nice to them. Had it happen again later because I'm like, hey, I'm the cop. I'm the guy that you come to for help. I don't ask for help because that was the culture back then. Yep. It wasn't until I wound up myself getting lung cancer in 2018 that I actually started speaking to somebody about it. Yeah, thank God, cancer free. They took out the right lung, all the cancer with it, no chemo, no radiation. I was lucky.
Good for you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank God. But I had PTSD, and I didn't have the balls to ask for help. I mean, that's really what it was. It takes courage to ask for help. I'm glad people are doing it now, but I came from a generation where that was taboo. So I'm glad that's gone because look, you come into this profession whole, you deserve to leave this profession whole, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember talking with a guy who was LAPD for a long time, and he'd been to a bunch of crazy stuff, obviously, long career, and he said he was just standing, I think he was like in Wendy's or McDonald's in line, and all of a sudden he felt like that anxiety, like just out of nowhere. He was like, this is like, he's like, in his own mind, he's fine. He's like, I'm fine.
Right.
Nothing's wrong. And then he had that like, that just encroaching feeling of doom, and he felt like he was going to pass out or he was having a heart attack. And he's like, where is this coming from? Like, I want to order a hamburger. And all of a sudden I'm having this thing. And it was from all the trauma, all the things he stuffed away. And it just, in a line trying to get a hamburger, it decided to rear its ugly head, and then of course you have to deal with it. Right. That's kind of the way it works. But that's, like you said, hopefully now things are pretty, in the mental health world with police it's a lot more progressive that way with like getting help. And, it used to be, hey, there's a poster on the wall with the 800 number in case you have any feelings and you need to talk to someone. It was almost said kind of like, if you have to, type of thing. Meanwhile, you're working with a bunch of guys that are on their third wife and, have a drinking problem. And you're like, well, maybe you should have called that like 25 years ago.
Well, and back in the day, there was also this fear that, hey, if I say I have something, going on with me in my head, they're going to take my guns and I'll be sitting behind a desk somewhere. Those days are over. Yeah. So thank God those days are over, because it prevented a lot of people who probably could have used some help from getting it. And look, cop suicides usually are higher than cop homicides each year. Right. So, how many lives could it have saved had the culture changed earlier? But I'm glad it's changed now, Yeah,
absolutely, Peter. Absolutely. Can you, we've already talked about some intense stuff, but can you recall a very intense or terrifying moment from your time in law enforcement?
Yeah, there was this one time. And look, the thing with ATF is most of the stuff we did is pre-planned. So you have a lot of planning in advance, element of surprise usually. I remember going back to I was talking about before about being in plain clothes. I was in plain clothes, working 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift one night, where we got a call of a home invasion. So, home invasion robbery. It was off Gun Hill Road in the Bronx, not too far from I-95, which I'm sure if you're up in Massachusetts, you're familiar with.
Sure.
And so we responded, and we were in an unmarked car that was set up to look like a cab. So we pull up to this guy who's standing in the street. He looks a little bit like disoriented, and he's trying to flag us down. So we very quickly realized this is one of the suspects from the home invasion. What happened was they knew the cops were coming. They went out a back window, jumped off a fire escape. So I got into a foot chase with this guy. Sergeant was behind me, and he turned around with the gun in his hand and tried to shoot me, but luckily he missed because I was too close. So when he turned with the gun in his hand with the gun in it hit my face, and the gun went off.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was like, oh fuck, I'm dead. Like I didn't know it was, I didn't know if I got shot or anything.
Just a concussion probably was like, whoa.
Oh, So, but luckily we were able to tackle him to the ground. The gun fell out of his hand at that point. We were able to cuff him up. But yeah, that was pretty terrifying. And then, I was at another call one time. There was a police officer named Hector Fontanez that got shot in the chest not too far from where I was just talking about. And I responded to that, and we threw Hector in the car and tried to get him to the hospital. His vest was shredded like frosted mini wheats that sat in the milk too long, for Christ's sake. Wow. And but he bled out in the car. We weren't able to do anything for him. So that was terrifying in a different way when you have someone's life in your hands and you're trying desperately to get him help, but we couldn't. It's just a real bad feeling of helplessness.
Yeah, God bless him. Jeez, man, that's intense. And after the gun goes off in your face like that, was there any moment where you were like, man, I don't know if I want to keep doing this, or like, was there any doubt in your mind of your career choice?
No, I loved the job. I probably, if I could go back and do any time of my career over again, it would be uniform patrol, to be honest with you, because it was fun. Like when you're a detective and you have cases there and you're like, oh, a shitty case. Tomorrow, when you go back to the office, that case is waiting for you. When you're on patrol, it's a clear slate. You know what I mean? Whatever bad things you deal with today, for the most part, you come back.
Give it to detectives.
Yeah, but I loved the job. And, I was, after that night, when I went home, I couldn't sleep. I was shitting my pants after the fact. But when it's going on, and you know the drill, you do what you do. You do what your training tells you to do. You don't get scared in that moment. You get scared later. But no, I loved it. In fact, even after that, I get into work early, try to get as much overtime as I can. It wasn't even for the money. It was because I had FOMO, fear of missing out. I didn't want to. Right. I didn't want to not be in that day to miss the big shooting or the big car chase or the big foot chase. I loved the job. At some point you get a little too old for that stuff, but because your body can't take it. But I just loved. So no, there was no second guessing. Hey, did I make the right move? In my mind, that was exactly where I needed to be. It's foolishly, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, we we need people to think like that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any cops. Absolutely. Peter, when you were with the ATF, how's it structured? Like, is there an ATF like division that does homicide specifically, or do you just kind of handle what comes in your investigation?
You handle what comes in your investigation, and it's weird because, like, I get mad sometimes when I hear agents talk about small cases, and I get all these small cases. Most of the cases that we had that turned into good cases all started as like a felon in possession of a firearm or something like that, where their name would have come up in a homicide that, hey, so and so keeps getting released because no one will testify against them. Well, that was the case usually because folks would get it into Rikers Island and get right back out. Federally, they sat in jail longer. So most of those cases started as felon in possessions. We'd get them in. They were looking at time. They would come in and they proffer. In the federal system, proffer is like when a defendant and his lawyer come in and sit down with the agents and the prosecutor. And for them to get a reduction in sentence, they got to tell you everything they were involved in and everything they've ever witnessed. So, I mean, that was like a treasure trove of just intelligence to go out. I mean, you don't just take them at face value. You got to go out there and corroborate what they say,
Sure.
Interview people, find evidence. So, I mean, that's how a lot of our cases that turned into homicide cases started, or even home invasion cases or RICO cases. Usually they started as a smaller case. Rarely did they ever start as that you knew you were walking into some big case. And in those instances, it was usually stuff that the police department brought you because said, hey, we need a federal partner to work on this with us, or an FBI or other agency might call you to be like a co-sponsoring agency on like a OCDF case or something.
Right.
But yeah, most of it was little small potatoes cases that turned into something good because you asked the right questions, or you took the case to the next level instead of just dropping the guy off at the magistrate's office and saying, all right, that's it, wash my hands and move on to the next case.
Right. Yeah. Ask a couple of the right questions, do a little prodding, and before you know it, it's starting to open up.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's great. I want to ask you about the Fast and Furious. So can you explain that a little bit to the audience, and also your role as a whistleblower?
Sure. Well, Fast and Furious was a scandal that happened back in 2011. It revolved around a case that started in 2010 in a ATF office in Phoenix. And it was a case where agents were not interdicting firearms that they knew were being smuggled to Mexico, to the Sinaloa cartel primarily. So what happened was, to paint the pictures, I went from working in New York, where we were doing just like I told you. We were working all of these gun cases, flipping people, building bigger cases. I think by the time I had gotten to Arizona, I went there because I actually got promoted. So I was a first-line supervisor at this point in Arizona, or I was an agent in New York. So I had probably done around maybe 150, 200 prior gun arrests in New York before I got to Phoenix. And the way it worked is we call the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we would make an arrest, and we would, okay, take them to the marshals, fingerprint them, blah, blah, blah. When I got to Phoenix, I would observe U.S. Attorney's Office not taking the cases and not prosecuting them. They'd always say, well, you know what, we can indict it later, just bring us the information. And, more often than not, the agents would do that, and the person would never get charged. So you had these folks that were actually trafficking in firearms to the Sinaloa cartel, and they weren't getting arrested. But what would happen is the gun dealers would call us and say, hey, there's a guy just walked in. I'll give you an example. He walked in with a paper bag full of money, and he asked us how many of the AK-47 variant rifles, because they're not real AKs, they're the semi-automatic versions.
Right.
How many do you have on the shelf? And the guy would say, I'll take them all. So the dealer would not make that sale because the dealers were good people. They were law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, a little fishy.
They would call us. Right. So we would go out to the area, and we would let them know, all right, we're outside. They would make the sale. We would follow the buyer off-site because we didn't want to do a car stop in the dealer's parking lot and put the dealer in a bad way. And we would do the car stop, ask questions, build probable cause, seize the guns, and no one would go to jail. So, but we would seize the guns. So anyway, this went on. I mean, I'm talking over the course of like the 3 years where my group was focused on doing that sort of case. We seized thousands of guns headed to Mexico. Not that many people went to federal jail. what would happen is my folks would be given the 5 words that they hated to hear: take it to the county, take it to the county. So the county prosecutors, when they could, would charge them. So anyway, a new group is formed to take over firearms trafficking cases to Mexico, and my group's mission was changed to investigate home invasion, robberies, and those sorts of offenses in Phoenix. Because Phoenix, unfortunately, during that time, had the distinction of leading the nation and being second in the hemisphere in home invasion robberies, because people were robbing the cartel stash spots. So anyway, while this new group is formed, every week we would have these supervisors meetings, and the new group supervisor, good guy, misguided, I would listen to these discussions about this one case they were working. And I remember the first discussion they were talking about, like, we're up to like 600 guns on this case. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I figured some of it was historical. Maybe they found business records. So, okay, no big deal. Next meeting, they're up to like over 800 guns on this case. And I'm like, okay, now are you guys, yes. I'm like, are you guys stopping the straw purchasers? Are you asking questions? No. We're doing something different. So look, I don't pretend to know everything. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not my group. I'm in a different group.
Right. Yeah.
So I just figured, okay, but whatever they're doing must be interesting. Wasn't discussed. Didn't next meeting you go up and up and up. So finally, I'm starting to say, hey man, like, what the fuck's going on? Why aren't you people stopping these straw buyers? This doesn't seem good. Like, one of these cops is going to be, one of these guns is going to be wind up pointed at some cop or some kid in the street. This is bullshit. So I'm told, hey man, mind your business. We know what we're doing. We got this. So anyway, Brian Terry, a Border Patrol agent, gets killed in December of 2010. And word comes back that one of the guns that was involved in killing Brian was tied to that case. And now all of a sudden things start to get out of control. And one of the agents in that group who knew what was going on contacted Chuck Grassley's office. So at another meeting, I'm sitting there and where I'm told that, hey, U.S. Attorney's Office isn't too happy with the agent, John Dodson, who blew the whistle. And there's rumblings they may even consider indicting him. And now at this point, I'm saying to myself, wait a minute. All of these firearms trafficking cases that we brought to the U.S. Attorney's Office that they punted on, and including, cases with bodies on them. There was one case, for example, the gun was purchased and within 48 hours was used in a shooting where 21 people were killed, including 4 cops in Canada and Mexico. The U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't take that case. So I'm like, so they're going to indict an agent who blew the whistle on this case because the U.S. Attorney's Office was intimately involved in it, but you wouldn't indict all of these firearms traffickers. So I went home that day. I was pissed off, like big time.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with my wife and telling her what was going on. And I said, look, I'm going to call Grassley's office and let them know, even though I wasn't involved in that case, that the U.S. Attorney's Office has been letting these guns walk for a long time, or at least the defendants rather. And now they're talking about indicting an agent for blowing the whistle when they wouldn't indict all of those firearms traffickers. So then what I found out later was the dealers themselves, right? Again, like I told you, they were decent people. They would call us and we would get out there and interdict the firearms, or if we couldn't get out there that day because we were tied up, they would postpone the sale till the next day. They would say, hey, the Nick's check didn't work out, come back tomorrow. Or they would just not make the sale, but they never let the gun just go off into the hands of people that they knew were criminals.
Right.
So, yeah. So anyway, so what happens is while we were doing what we were doing, the guns weren't getting traced because they weren't ever making it to crime scenes. So when a gun leaves a gun store, we're not going to trace it because we know that where the gun was purchased, because the trace only will take you to the retail purchase, right?
Right.
So anyway, the gun dealers are like, once my group was repurposed to the home invasion stuff, all of a sudden they're getting traces back. So they're like, wait, why are we getting calls from ATF saying that our gun's been recovered in Mexico? For all these years when we called you folks, we never were getting traces. So they were like, look, we're not going to sell these guns anymore to these folks. We're done. So the ATF supervisor that was involved in that case and the head of the ATF office in Phoenix and the U.S. Attorney's Office met with the gun dealers and said, hey, listen, this is groundbreaking what we're working on. Continue doing what you're doing. Continue making those sales. So they did. Well, as it turns out, now those same gun dealers that did what the U.S. Attorney's Office and ATF told them to do are being sued by the government of Mexico. I mean, that's how screwed up that whole mess was.
Gosh.
So yeah, I blew the whistle because, look, our cases weren't getting prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. There was rumblings that they were going to prosecute John. And the other thing I realized is, like, my agents, look, the only way as a federal agent for you to really reach your full potential is to have that buy-in with the prosecutors, because you need things. You need court orders. You need to be able to take a guy out of prison. So you need a writ of habeas corpus so he can go point out addresses where he's done things in the past. They weren't doing that for us. So I was like, here, not only were they talking about indicting John, and not only were they just horrible partners to work with on gun cases, but as a supervisor, I'm realizing my agents will never reach their full potential because of them, not because the agents aren't trying hard, but because the prosecutors that we were working with were horrible. So I wound up testifying in June of 2011 in front of Congress about what happened with that entire fiasco of a case.
How did that go over for you when you started doing that, when you started speaking up?
Oh, not good. It's, long before the actual hearing, because that was televised on C-SPAN and little snippets were on the news, there was a deposition behind closed doors, which is normal. So that deposition went on for many hours, and there were staffers, like from Senator Leahy's staff, Senator Grassley's staff, Darrell Issa's staff, and Elijah Cummings' staff. So, I mean, I told them everything I knew about the case I spoke about before in Cananea, for example, about one case we had actually involved the dirty gun dealer who admittedly trafficked over 1,000 guns to the cartel. He didn't give a shit. So, I mean, I outlined all of these cases to them, spoke about another case that we were working that involved a guy who was making grenades for the Sinaloa cartel.
Jeez.
That the U.S. Attorney's Office refused to prosecute, despite confessions and him getting caught crossing the border with 115 disassembled grenades in his tires. They refused to prosecute that one too. So I tell them all these things. When the deposition was over, I walked back to my office, which was about 4 to 6 blocks away. I don't know exactly. And before I even made it back to my office, I got a phone call from a prosecutor from that office saying, "Hey, Pete, everything that you told those congressional staffs has been relayed to the United States Attorney." So I'm like, okay, that's not good.
Great.
The very next, exactly, the chief federal law enforcement officer for the state. And so then anyway, the next day I get contacted by another person from that office, because not all of them were assholes, some of them were. And he's like, "Hey, Pete, I need to meet you for coffee." So, okay. So I met him. He hands me an email from the U.S. Attorney to his entire staff saying, anyone running into Pete Forcelli, even if it's on the weekend and he's sitting there having a cup of coffee with his family, it is to be reported to me through your chain of command immediately. So at this point, I realized I'm a marked man. This is not a comfortable place to be.
What do you do as an ATF agent in that? Who do you go to for help?
Well, I mean, I had already spoken to Grassley's folks, so I called them, and truthfully, I called the Inspector General's office as well, because the Department of Justice has an Inspector General, and they said they were monitoring it. But and then it got worse. Like, I remember the day before my congressional testimony. So now this is going to be testimony. I'm wearing a suit. I'm in front of Congress. There's cameras and everything. I'm already a nervous wreck at this point.
Oh yeah, I'd be crapping my pants.
and I get a phone call from one of the chiefs at the U.S. Attorney's Office, who was a decent guy. Mike Morrissey was his name, and he was the messenger. So I wasn't really mad at him, but I was pretty pissed off. With the grenade case, we tried to arrest the guy who was making those grenades. When we couldn't get him, we were trying to get Mexico to get him. We tried to even see if we could get venue in another district, like where the parts came from, for somebody to prosecute this guy. Well, I get a phone call saying, "Hey, Pete, this is Mike. Our office's position," which is when you knew you were about to get taken in the backside. Our office's position is we never allow John Baptiste Kingery to transport those grenade parts across the Mexican border, and what they were trying to say was that we did, which was a lie. So here I am, like the night before my testimony, they're starting to take some of the stuff that they did and turn it around to use against me and my agents. Thank God everything that we did was documented and everything. But I mean, it turned into like a 4-year investigation for me to clear my name. And during which, because, a lot of it conversations I had with prosecutors. So a lot of it was he said, she said kind of things. Whereas to the point where I was telling the Inspector General investigators and the congressional investigators, "Hey, man, if you don't believe what I'm saying, put me on the box. I'll take a polygraph." I told them straight up. I said, "I will take a polygraph about anything I'm talking to you about, Fast and Furious, any of the related cases with stuff going to Mexico, with Kingery. I said, I'm not going to let you go on a fishing expedition, but I'm an open book for any of those things. And it was always, oh, no, Pete, we believe you. We believe you. But I mean, that happened 6 times over the course of 4 years where I'm like, hey, man, if you don't believe me, put me on the box, which was a gamble because if you fail a polygraph, they can pull your security clearance and then you're shit out of luck and might have to look for another job. And look,
Jeez.
I don't believe polygraphs are exactly perfect. So,
Right.
I mean, but at the same time, I didn't know what else I could do to defend my reputation other than continue to fight because, I wasn't going to go out and let them, tarnish my reputation and go out
Yeah.
the wrong
Screw
way.
that.
I was going to leave. I was going to leave with my reputation intact, but it took 4 years to completely clear my name and just get back to work.
Damn. So during that 4 years, were you able to even get involved in other cases? Was this what you were doing?
Well, initially I was not doing anything. They had me come in. I sat in a cubicle. My corner office was gone. I sat in a cubicle next to the furniture that was broken that they were getting ready to throw out and the garbage cans and everything.
Nice.
So I reread the Beltway Sniper investigation after action report 3 times in the course of many months. So then they sent me to headquarters to write policy for a few months. And then the director, well, what happened was a person who was in Phoenix when the shit hit the fan that came there, who I didn't really know very well. This guy's name's Tom Brandon. He later became the deputy director of ATF. He threw me a lifeline and sent me up to Canada. So I spent 2 years in Canada as a liaison to law enforcement up there. So I was basically up there to help them deal with cases that had ties to the United States, which was good because I couldn't work in Arizona anymore because your primary job as a supervisor, besides supervising your group, is to be a liaison and kind of an advocate when shit goes sideways at the U.S. Attorney's Office to get them to work with your folks. Well, I was no longer capable of doing that because they hated my guts.
Yeah.
But the position in Canada was great, though. I'll tell you, I got to work a lot with the Ontario Provincial Police, with the Toronto Police Service. You want to talk about just great cops and just good people.
Canadians are great. I love Canadians.
They're awesome. And they're old school, too. I mean, in Canada, you think of like a little softer.
No, they're tough as nails up there.
Yeah, well, the culture up there, they're very kind people. The cops up there are like knuckle draggers, man. They're fucking awesome. So I loved it. So I worked with them for 2 years, and then I went back, got promoted actually, and I was put in charge of leadership training for ATF.
You were assistant deputy director. Is that right?
Well, when I left, I was a deputy director. So I was a GS-15, like division chief. Then I was sent down to Miami as an assistant special agent in charge. And then I was put in charge of the Miami office, which was nice. And then I went back to headquarters as a deputy assistant director after 3 years in Miami. While I was down in Miami, I had great agents. U.S. Attorney's Office down there was great. I had the unfortunate responsibility of having to be in charge of the investigation into how Omar Mateen got his gun for the the Pulse nightclub shooting. And then I also oversaw ATF's investigations into the Fort Lauderdale airport mass shooting. And Parkland, and those were tough crime scenes to just go to. Just rough. They took a lot out of me.
Oh, I can only imagine. So, kudos to the ATF for not stifling your career after doing that. After testifying to the truth and all that, it didn't sound like they punished you.
No, it was this Tom Brandon, and there were 3 people: Tom Brandon, Tom Atterbury, and actually the director that was appointed by Barack Obama, who when he got the job, I was kind of shitting my pants because he was friends with Holder, and my testimony was not kind to Eric Holder and the Obama administration. So I was like, oh boy, this is not going to be good for me. I'm fucked. And he turned out to be a straight shooter. The guy's a Marine Corps colonel. He was a U.S. attorney in Minnesota. He was like, hey man, just as long as you told the truth, we're good. Tom Brandon, who was his deputy director, was solid. Because look, I know full well most whistleblowers, their careers are over. Usually there's divorces, there's bankruptcies.
Sure.
They told me, specifically Tom Brandon, as long as you're telling the truth, I have your back. He did. So, I mean, he should get credit for that. The other thing is, like, he never fought my battles for me, but they let me fight my battles. It's like, I remember that, like when one of the OIG reports came out, some of the stuff that was in there was bullshit. So I said, look, I'm going to go to Congress and I'm going to fucking tell them that this is bullshit. So Tom was like, well, just make sure you do it on your time. So literally when the report was, because they tell you when the report's going to come out, the OIG, it was supposed to come out on noon. It was a day, I believe, in October. So I literally sat on a park bench near the Capitol building, and I already called the staffers and said, hey, when this report drops, I want to talk to you about it. So I sat there and I'm looking on my phone, and as soon as it was published to the OIG's website, I called them like, where do you want me? And we sat there and I just went through line by line, explaining, my position on everything. And look, I'm not going to say I got everything right. There were mistakes made. I wasn't trafficking in firearms. I wasn't smuggling. I wasn't doing any of that shit. But, I made some leadership decisions that I probably would have made differently on a surveillance, for example, where my agents they wanted to rely on a poll camera. I didn't trust the poll camera because I didn't trust technology because I'm an old fart. And surveillance got burned. So, stuff like that I owned. I'm not the kind of guy that points fingers at people for my mistakes. So, but after that happened, it was pretty much done. Congress released a report basically saying, hey, DOJ, you fucked up, and you shouldn't try to throw an agent under the bus for prosecutors' mistakes. And then I just went about my life after that.
Oh, thank goodness. So what was the impetus? What was the force driving Fast and Furious? Why did they do it?
Well, I'm going to be completely honest. I was not in that group. So I couldn't figure out, originally what they were saying is, well, what we were going to do was we were going to use the straw purchasing and the firearms trafficking laws to take down a cell within a cartel. That's what they were saying. Now, first off, the prosecutor that was leading that case was leading other cases that we had worked with him in the past. And he was horrible. I mean, he was an amateur. So it'd be like taking a kid who sucked on a high school football team and having him throw touchdowns for the Green Bay Packers at the Super Bowl. It just made no sense. So it was just a failed strategy to begin with. And then when you consider, like, DEA in Mexico had a robust network of CIs. They also had vetted units down there of Mexican law enforcement that could actually take action on shit, which we didn't have. So, I mean, if DEA with the narcotics trafficking conspiracy laws and those tools couldn't take down a cartel, the idea that we were going to do it with straw purchasing violations was just ridiculous.
So it sounds political. Sounds like there was some kind of political driving force.
Well, here's what I'll say. What was going on is I don't know if you're familiar with what happens if you buy two handguns. There's a form that's called the multiple sale form that's filled out. So if you go into a gun store and you buy two-shot Derringers capable of firing 4 shots fully loaded, both between the two of them, you fill out this form, which gets sent to ATF. So ATF knows. So, and look, full disclosure, we've had cases where someone went in. I'll give you an example. A guy bought 19 Glock 19s. So we get the form. We're like, okay,
it's a good gun.
Good gun. Kind of unusual. Most collectors don't buy 19 of the same gun,
right? Especially a Glock. It's like
so that's suspicious to us. So we went and talked to the guy, and he's like, "Yes, sir. I started a security guard company, and I bought the guns. My plan is to, give them to the guards. They'll sign them in. So, okay, good to go." So I mean,
right.
It was just a conversation. So, but long story short, what happens with that multiple sale form is it's an indicator sometimes, because I mean, you'll see somebody buying guns and they repeatedly buy guns, and then those guns keep getting traced from crime scenes. That's somebody you want to go talk to.
Sure.
Well, for rifles, there was no such requirement, right? So that guy I talked about earlier who went in and bought the 13 AK-47.
Yeah,
there was no form. So the only time ATF would know about those instances were if the dealer called us, or if it was a savvy straw buyer who the dealer just didn't realize was a straw buyer and sold the guns honestly thinking it was an honest sale. We would find out when the gun gets recovered at a crime scene. So what happened was they were pushing this thing called Demand Letter 3, right? Which said that if a person on the border state buys multiple rifles, that same form would be filled out. So I think that was the political aspect based on what I heard. And again, I wasn't involved in the decision makings. I wasn't in those conference rooms at headquarters or at the Department of Justice. But that was the only political thing that that really came out of Operation Fast and Furious was this Demand Letter 3. If that's why they did it, they should be ashamed of themselves. And again, because a lot of bodies dropped in Mexico, and Brian Terry's dead. On the other end of guns that were trafficked during Operation Fast and Furious. And in those cases, ATF agents could have stopped those guns, but they didn't.
Yeah.
Sinful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good for you, man. Thank God for guys like you in law enforcement who stand up and say what's true. We need that. We'll all totally be lost without that. Jeez. Peter, can you remember a heartwarming situation from your time in law enforcement?
Oh, there were a lot of them. I remember one time there was a young girl, not that young. She was 14 years old, but she was special needs, and she was missing. And it was a big deal. Obviously, she was severely autistic and missing in the Bronx. Not the place you want to get lost in the projects in the Bronx.
Yeah, hell no.
South Bronx. South Bronx is like block upon block upon block of housing projects. So I remember, being able to help locate that girl and bring her home to her mother. The feeling, just was amazing. But there's plenty of times like that, where you just you see the worst in mankind. I think when you're a cop, but you also see some of the best. You also see acts of heroism on the part of civilians that you're, a witness to or have to document. I remember one time even seeing these two guys on the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn. This gasoline truck literally exploded, and there was a guy stuck in the cab. And I watched as two guys. One was an off-duty fireman. Another guy was a regular guy. Dragged this guy out right before the entire cab became engulfed in flames.
Wow.
And it was funny because the civilian was so overcome with emotion for doing such a good thing. He was like sobbing.
Yeah.
The fireman was used to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But we see the good and the bad as cops.
Yeah, absolutely. So a real popular question on the show is advice that you would give with all your years of experience to someone who's thinking about becoming a police officer or is in the process now, is in backgrounds, or, is just weighing their options. What would you tell these people?
Being a cop is perhaps one of the most rewarding careers I think that you can pursue if you do it with the right intentions. I mean, you're literally part of the solution. You're protecting people from some really bad people. You're helping people at their worst. I think to do it effectively, you have to really remember that the badge is not a reflection of power. It's a reflection of responsibility. It's a lot of trust is placed in you when you get that badge and that gun and you're put out on patrol. And I think if you're willing to go in there and be humble and recognize that throughout your career, I don't care how much time, when I left ATF, I had 35 years of total law enforcement experience. I was still learning every day. And I was learning from people that had more time on the job than me. And I was learning from people that came right out of the academy who just looked at things through a different lens. So if you're humble and you're willing to be a sponge and just learn and just stick with your principles and remember that the badge means responsibility and not power, I think you're on the right track.
All right. Words of wisdom. Thank you very much for that, brother. Hey, let's talk about the book a little bit. It says it's coming out in March. What was it? What was the motivation here? Just, I mean, obviously you have great stories, but what spurred you to do it?
There were a couple things actually, and I'm not going to lie. One of them was I had a ton of legal bills that I had to pay over the years, and I never made that money back. So I hope the book sells. But the reality is, towards the end of my career, I was a deputy assistant director. I was the head of training. So I'd go down to the academy, and you know what happens. You get some folks that just take the job, and they're just happy to have a job. But every now and then I'd run into an agent who got hired by us. And so he would start Googling and researching and look at the history of the organization.
Sure.
And invariably I would hear, you were one of the whistleblowers. Did we really do that? And so I would do what? And they would all have these weird, visions of what happened during Operation Fast and Furious. Because if you watched the news back then, you either heard the Democrat version of what happened, which was blame Bush, or the Republican version of what happened, which was this all started because of Obama. So the real story was never told for them. I know there were stories about the scandal itself, but not how we got there. So I wanted to set the record straight for these cops and agents that might want to come on with ATF, or just people who are interested in what happened there, so that they know. I just think it's important, because if you don't know about history, somebody might repeat it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the book's called The Deadly Path, How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawyers Armed Mexican Cartels. And you will share with me the link for purchasing that in March when it comes out.
Yes. It's actually, the link is available for pre-order now on Amazon. But yeah.
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes.
Perfect. I think, I'll get it to you.
Awesome. Peter, it was an honor to have you on, brother. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. It was an honor to be here. I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to do the outro. Takes about 3 minutes. Can you hang on for a second?
Sure.
All right, I'll be right with you. The great Peter Forcelli, guys. Man, fascinating stories, especially the really detailed look behind Fast and Furious. Really, really good stuff. Thank you to Peter for coming on. Thank you for everybody for supporting the show, the rating and the reviewing, all the things you guys do. I truly appreciate it. This is the time in the show when we thank the Patreon sergeant. So there's 2 levels in Patreon. You can be a patrolman or a sergeant. Either way, I'm going to send you a sticker. But the sergeants will get a shout out on the show. And who I'm talking about is Andy Biggs, Greg Gadboy, the great Adam Mihal, Chris June, the great Gary Steiner, Jake Pinedo, John Shoemaker, the great Lauren Stimpson, the handsome Lane Campbell, Seth Wright, everybody, James Rose, the one and only, the great Tony Fahey, Ben Peters, see it work, brother, Jason Lau, don't forget him, Mike Wynn, the great Sasha McNabb, Scott Minkler, Tammy Walsh, holding it down at dispatch, William James Long, that's Deputy William James Long to you, thank you very much, Sean Clifford, Dennis Carrasquillo, keep it coming, brother, Iceman from Motor Cop Chronicles, check him out, great podcast, George Tessier, I'll see you at church, brother, Scott Young, the great, Thomas Connell, Wayne M. Miller, retired ATF and author, Dan Carlson from Burley Boards, Doug and Kelly Newman, love you guys, see you at church, Dave Ellman, Elliot Sykes, Richard Tolles, keep on trucking, my man, Christian, the great Jace Crow, Brad Thompson, Kyle Roberts, Zach Haney, the great Nancy Hammond, Clark Luckhoff, Adam McMahon, Ossifer Andy, Sheriff Ron, and the great Zachary Pleat. Guys, thank you for supporting the show. You keep the lights on over here and you keep the episodes coming, so thank you. And I'll see you guys next week.